others to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys them and teaches others to do so will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness goes beyond that of the experts in the law and the Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Interesting words of Jesus. So he was just talking about the righteousness, basically the way that we're living, being better than what the religious leaders and Pharisees were doing. What were the experts in the law and the Pharisees doing that Jesus was referring to? They were talking a good God game, but then they weren't loving their neighbor. They weren't taking care of people like they were supposed to. So Jesus basically is pointing out, like, look, just talking a good game about my Father isn't going to get the job done. I need you guys to live it, not just blab about it. And then he moves into, you've heard it said to an older generation, do not murder. And whoever murders will be subjected to the judgment. But I say to you that anyone who's angry with a brother will be subjected to judgment, and whoever insults a brother will be brought before the council, and whoever says fool will be sent to a fiery hell. So then if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your gift. Reach agreement quickly with your accuser while on the way to court, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the warden, and you'll be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will never get out of there until you've paid the last penny. Let's look at this whole Jesus used a little hyperbole at the beginning, okay? But let's back it up. So he says, unless you are more righteous than the Pharisees and the experts in the law, you're never going to experience heaven. Interestingly enough, before that, what Jesus says is this: the one who breaks the least of these commands and teaches others to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. He doesn't say they'll go to hell. He said they'll be called least in the kingdom. Like, you're not going to be exalted in the kingdom if you're teaching people to avoid what God is telling them as far as how to live. Doesn't mean you're not going to get in, and he doesn't say that. He says you're going to be least in the kingdom. But it's very interesting that as Matthew's writing this, he points out what Jesus says here about unless your righteousness goes beyond that of the experts in the law. So basically he's saying, look, unless you're willing to actually live it out too, like, what the heck, guys? And then he goes on. Now, does Jesus literally mean if you say dummy to your brother that you get tossed in hell? It's interesting, as we go through all the you've heard it said, one of the biggest things you'll notice is he goes, and then this, and then this, and then this. Jesus is basically pointing out to us, look, you've heard it said, don't kill. I'm trying to help you guys understand that you don't just wake up one day and become a killer. It starts in the heart. So if you've got anger in your heart, he points out the whole don't kill. And then he says, if you even call your brother a fool, this. And then he says, if you even think your brother has a problem with you, go reconcile it. If you read through all of the you heard it says, it's not that Jesus was leveling up, like God's going to punish you if. But rather, Jesus points out throughout every one of these, you think that the focus is the end result, but I'm telling you, focus on where it begins. It begins with the feeling in your heart. If you're angry with somebody, don't let it escalate to name calling. Don't let it escalate to going and killing them. Go resolve it before it becomes a real problem. So much so that if you even think your brother's got a problem with you, go talk to him. That's what Jesus brings up. He goes on about adultery. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I say, whoever looks at a woman to desire her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. It's better to lose one of your members than to have your whole body thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It's better to lose one of your members than to have your whole body in hell. What is Jesus saying? He is not telling you to literally rip out your eyeball. The audience Matthew was writing to, he wasn't literally saying, pluck out your eye, cut off your hand. What he's saying is this: you've heard it said to you that committing adultery, that don't do it. But he's saying, but what leads to it? I'm telling you, when you look at somebody with lust in your eyes, that starts the process in your heart of going, ooh, I want that. And he's like, if you're not careful, you're going to end up committing adultery. So the whole pluck your eye out, he's basically saying, look, do whatever it takes not to start the process in your heart to go the wrong direction. Now, he's not saying it's bad to have desires. I mean, if he was, he would be basically wiping out all of Song of Songs. I mean, this is about two people who they're literally fairly graphic in that day and age, talking about like each other's bodies and how they long to be together. So how would we reconcile that with what we're reading here in Matthew if thinking about somebody and desiring them is the bad thing? Jesus, in talking about this, is saying, look, you see somebody else's wife, don't look at her like that. Don't think those thoughts. Those thoughts lead to actions. It begins in the heart. He goes on, divorce. You've heard it said, whoever divorces his wife must give her legal document. But I say everyone who divorces their wife, except for immorality, makes her commit adultery. And then whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Jesus isn't saying people can't remarry. If we read through this again, what Jesus is pointing out is what's in your heart. Listen, it's interesting. Right after talking about desires for another woman and adultery, Jesus then goes on to say, because what's the combat to that? Well, I guess if I don't want to commit adultery, I'll just divorce my wife. I'll just give her divorce papers. Jesus is saying, look, you can't just throw and discard your spouse. You can't throw them away and discard them because you've got these urges somewhere else. Jesus is saying, when you take that vow, like, it seems as though Jesus is reminding us that we need to run with the assumption marriage is forever. And that while Moses gave the allowance for divorce, and you read it in another part of the scriptures where Jesus says, Moses gave you this because of you guys being idiots, basically. Jesus is pointing out again, look, you can't just discard your wife like it's no big deal. Because not only are you, when you divorce her, if it's not for sexual immorality, not only are you making her commit adultery, because technically she's still married to you and will be forever, he's saying you're also passing that on to whoever else she marries, because there was really no reason that you should have ever divorced. See, Jesus wasn't leveling up saying there's a new sin level, right? Like a boss level of sin. And like, it's not about that. Throughout all that you've heard it said, it always comes back to one thing. Check your heart. Because your heart, as the scriptures say, is deceitful above all things. So Jesus seems to be pointing out over and over, any actions that we do always begin with a thought or a feeling in the heart. So it wasn't that he was leveling up what qualifies as sin, but it seems more that Jesus is saying, don't think that you wake up one day and these bad decisions happen. You don't wake up and murder somebody. You don't wake up and commit adultery. You don't just wake up and divorce. But what happens in our heart leads to those feelings that lead to taking action. So Jesus seems to be saying in Matthew chapter 5, make sure you take a good look at what's going on in your heart so you don't end up walking down a path of regret and doing the things that you shouldn't do. There you go. There's today's Bible study live. I would encourage you to read through Matthew chapter 5. Read you've heard it said eye for an eye. You've heard it said don't break an oath. You've heard it say love your neighbor and hate your enemies. Read through those. Get into the word yourself. I think you'll notice the same thing. Friends, can I encourage you? Look, my wife and I and some friends have had some dialogue over the past weeks about following God and the frustrations with people who are Christians, beating up on each other, beating up on people who aren't Christians, all the bad mouthing and backstabbing amongst the church. No wonder people look at us and go, ooh, I don't want to be part of that. Because they say the way that we treat each other isn't necessarily good all the time. Matter of fact, a lot of times it sucks. And we are having this conversation. And one of the hardest things in the world is to be able to love someone that we disagree with, especially when it's about something extremely important, right? So I want to wrap with this. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be like your Father in heaven, since he causes the sun to rise on the evil and good and sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. I want to stop right there because it's very important. The sun doesn't represent the good and the rain doesn't represent something bad happening. I've heard people teach, the sun rises on the good and the bad, and that's like God's blessing. And the rain is like, God's judgment. Well, actually, no. To a desert people, rain was also a good thing. So Jesus says here, So your Father in heaven, since he causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, meaning a new day. So the overcoming of darkness happens to the evil and the good. The light will overcome the darkness for both those who are doing evil and those who are doing good. God brings that new day and that new opportunity and that new light for everybody, because everyone has a chance to turn toward him. Everybody, the evil and the good. So God causes the light to overcome the darkness every single day for all of us. And he continues, and he sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. He sends rain. You know what rain does? Rain sustains. Rain brings life. Rain brings, your body is mostly made of water. Here's a desert people. They didn't have running water in pipes. They had wells here and there. Rain was good. Rain helps crops grow. Rain sustains life. And Jesus said, look, don't you condemn your enemies. Bless them. Pray for them. God sends blessing on them too. And many of us will say, why would God do that? Why would God send a blessing to evil people, bad people, people who are persecuting his people? See, because when God sends blessing, when God shows love, the idea behind it is that will cause the person receiving it to turn and say, I want to be with you, God. I want to follow you, God. Now imagine us living in a world where we shower people with blessing and love, even though they're persecuting, which we don't really know persecution, but even though they're hating on us, even though they're throwing shade at you. How crazy would it be to only show good to them, to shower them with blessing, to be praying for them in spite of how they treat us? Whew. Man, imagine a world like that where everybody said, instead of retaliating, I'm going to pray and I'm going to show kindness. Jesus says, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? It's kind of a rhetorical question. The reward you have is that they love you back. He said, even the tax collectors do the same, don't they? And if you only greet your brothers and sisters, what more do you do? Even the Gentiles do the same. Remember, Matthew's writing to a Jewish audience. That's who Jesus is speaking to in this context. So he's pointing out, even the people that you call unclean do all the things you do. He says, so then, be perfect as your Father, Heavenly Father, is perfect. Now, what does perfect mean? This is an echo of Deuteronomy 18:13. You must be holy as I am holy. So the word perfect, as some of the English translations use here, it's really meant to be holy as your Father in heaven is holy. What is holy? Holy is set apart. Be different in a good way. Friends, we have an opportunity in this world to be different in a good way. We're not always going to do it perfect, but we have an opportunity. So I'm going to challenge you. Instead of looking at Jesus' words as leveling up the sin and people being even more like sinful because of their thoughts, and their thoughts are sin, and that, instead of looking for reasons to send people to hell with our words and our thoughts, how about this? Let's look for opportunities to love. Let's look for opportunities in our own heart to change for the good. Let's look for opportunities to be set apart so that when the world looks at those who say we follow Jesus, they say, man, those people sure do love one another, and they sure do seem to be loving their neighbors. Wow. I got to know who this Jesus is. Let's try and embrace that opportunity. Thanks again.